Thanks, Graham. Right, you guys know what to do now. Okay. Same panel.
Yeah.
Graham, Amanda, Gary.
I would just like to say that's great, and I'm sure a lot of people in the room have an instinctive understanding of what you've been talking about. But at a seminar that we ran on Friday with some property developers, this is the Urban Design Forum seminar, the developers agreed that the sort of vision statements coming out of councils about urban design stuff was fine, that they were reasonably aligned in that sort of philosophy. But once you put the project in for resource consent, all hell breaks loose. And it does seem to me, Graham, that we need a regulatory reform in this country to enable the sort of discussion between architect and urban designer that you've talked about to actually produce results.
Look, I would agree with that. If that happens, that is really problematic, but there are ways around it. Let's say you may have vision statements in words, but that should really lead to, say, some sort of framework document that sets out, beyond all doubt, what the intentions are for a part of a city or a neighbourhood within a city, which effectively sets the rules. And then that gives something where there's some certainty as to what the intentions are. Part of my professional experience is in writing design guidelines, and not design rules, but design guidelines, because I don't think you can have design. There are no rules for design. There are certain good principles, but there has to be flexibility. So I think at the next level of detail, there could well be location-specific principles or guidelines or whatever, which help to define what's important, what's going to be considered important, so that when a developer goes through and spends a lot of money on a really good development, they can feel that they have a good chance of getting it through. Now, I should also say that there's real merit and benefit in situations such as you describe of the designers talking with the local authority or the right people in the local authority. Now, I know that can be problematic sometimes because local authority people can change and you get a new person coming in and you get a different view. But that shouldn't be the case if there is a really valued, really well prepared, say, framework plan for the whole area, say, and say design criteria, which everybody's agreed on. So I think there's a way around it. I agree, it's an issue.
One of the questions I have, and I guess one of the troubles I've personally found with issues of urban design is that it kind of seems to end up becoming necessarily kind of risk adverse, because if you're consulting the public, as you've suggested, is important, and people without I guess an appreciation for the kinds of risks that may be worthwhile taking because the payoffs are good. Like, for instance, if you went and presented a part of Barcelona with skinny alleyways opening to spaces and stuff, I mean, a lot of people just go, oh, it's unsafe and I don't want it, sort of thing, and yet it works and it's wonderful to be in. And, I mean, how do you deal with that?
Okay, look, that's a really good point and a really tricky issue, because people generally have an opinion on what they're familiar with, only like what they're familiar with. So if something new comes along, that's problematic. So one thing, I wouldn't go to the public, let's say on an issue of traffic safety design, because as urban designers, we work with traffic engineers, because the public won't have a clue about how to design intersections to make it better. You're wasting your time. Likewise, you wouldn't go with them on something where the issue you're consulting on needs to be within their area of expertise. Now that means, now let's say if you have to go to them with a big project, you have to provide them with, in the workshop processes that I've been involved in, we used it in Kilburnie as well, you do a public presentation to the audience just to get them in the frame of mind to think about an issue, so they're not coming up to a plan on the wall and a 3D model cold and thinking, well, not understanding it and why it's being done. So I wouldn't say soften them up, but effectively it is a softening up process where you show them, talk about various principles and how, and particularly show them precedents of other places. Now, Alistair showed that very successfully where he took people across to successful developments in Europe, and they would have come back raving. Well, you can do the same thing. So you don't want to take them into that process cold, because you'll probably get a negative response.
We had a pretty interesting, again, to pick up on the presentation that was on last Friday, I think Dave Henderson from Christchurch was talking about the idea of the one-to-one model, and everybody in the audience at the time sort of laughed and thought that was a joke, but at some level he's implementing that down in Christchurch by actually doing a small piece of the project. I think it was the south of Litchfield, was it the project that he was doing, where he was doing a small piece, then the public very clearly saw what was going on in there and chose for the next one and the next one and the next one. And so you get an urban design that actually is real public engagement, that they say, I want that, and keep on going. The problem also that came out of that whole discussion was from another developer was saying, you know, their issue is they master plan these huge areas, and then they can only get people to buy in advance, some 5%, and you know how awful that was for them, because people were essentially having to trust them for what they were going to get. And I guess it just seems to me that this serious issue of trying to find scenarios where we can see small pieces and then know, okay, that small piece is okay, which is sort of your catalyst for change issue. What are these catalysts that can say, that small piece is great, people see it, and it makes people change because they can believe that it's actually going to work rather than...
Yeah, like that is the role of a pilot project where you build something which demonstrates to people what is possible, and they try it out, and then the promoter, the developer, has confidence that they should go ahead because people like it, and people like it because they've experienced it. I can give an example in Wellington, which has nothing to do with urban design. After that terrible crash of 1987, which in about 1990 led to huge vacancy in Wellington, there were all these buildings around which were vacant. And the City Council had for years been trying to get people to live in the central city. There was incentive zoning and plot ratio bonuses, all this sort of stuff, floor area ratio bonuses, and nobody would build apartments. And suddenly, and people said, no, you wouldn't live in the centre of Wellington. What a horrible, grotty, noisy, smelly place, etc. Then one entrepreneur, or a couple of entrepreneurs, you know, quite clever developers, they started converting those vacant office spaces into apartments. And I'm sure the same thing happened in Auckland. And I was talking with the head of NZIA at the time. I had him in at the School of Architecture to talk to the students, and he said, effectively, you could buy a building for a quarter of its construction cost. So there's a huge economic opportunity. So it wasn't a heck of a risk for the developer. And people started living in these central city apartments, and they absolutely loved it. And that was how we got our inner city residential in Wellington. It was an opportunity that came out of an economic crisis. People experienced it, fantastic. Now they also experienced some really shoddy construction in the early days and noise issues and so on, and that is being resolved by architects doing good design now. So yeah, the way to get change is to get people to experience these things, I think.